Bun găsit la emisiunea Știință și Cunoaștere. În aceeași perioadă anului 2013, când realizam interviul cu dr. Bruce Lipton, am avut ocazia să-l cunosc pe Howard Bloom, filozof și gânditor, autodidact, fondator al mai multor grupuri de cercetare științifică și nu întâmplător, în partea a doua a interviului cu Bruce Lipton am inclus și un fragment scurt cu Howard Bloom, comentând teoria evoluționistă a lui Darwin. Pe parcursul interviului cu Howard Bloom am fost surprins și chiar șocat de ceea ce am aflat de la el, având în vedere faptul că era pentru prima dată când ne-am întâlnit și ne-am cunoscut, iar domnia sa părea că înțelege lucrurile, fenomenele și tiparele de gândire într-un mod intuitiv care pur și simplu sfidează rațiunea. Ceea ce veți afla în minutele următoare nu seamănă cu nimic din tot ceea ce v-am prezentat până acum la Știință și Cunoaștere, iar aceste informații nu le găsiți nicăieri pe internet, cu excepția cărților sale. Nu am întâlnit până acum niciodată un gânditor liber, free thinker, și nici nu știam prea bine ce înseamnă aceasta. Un prieten de pe Facebook m-a sfătuit să-l caut pe Howard Bloom, deoarece e un om cu totul special. Am făcut aceasta și, spre surprinderea mea, a acceptat pe loc ideea interviului, dar a trebuit să am multă răbdare până să-mi poată acorda timpul necesar. Howard Bloom gândește liber în sensul că el gândește dincolo de șabloanele și tiparele pe baza cărora majoritatea dintre noi am fost obișnuiți să gândim. Acest fapt șochează deoarece ne conduce spre fațete ale realității înconjurătoare care pur și simplu ne scapă atenției. Nici măcar nu bănuim că acele fațete ne scapă atenției. Dimpotrivă, suntem aproape convinși că ceea ce știm despre lume, biologie, societate, economie și politică este exact ceea ce cred toți ceilalți că știu. O să vă șocheze dacă vă spun cu ce anume s-a ocupat Howard Bloom pe durata întregii sale cariere. În primul rând, pasiunea sa cea mai mare a fost, citez, comportamentul de grup, începând de la quarci până la fiinţele umane. Am încheiat citatul. În anul 1968, datorită genului său de gândire creatoare, a primit 4 burse în domeniul psihologiei și neurobiologiei, pe care însă le-a refuzat, deoarece el avea un cu totul alt proiect. S-a dedicat unui domeniu neobișnuit pe care domnia sa l-a numit cultura populară. A fost determinat să pătrundă în miezul forțelor care alcătuiesc istoria, unde sunt create miturile, pasiunile și mișcările sociale. Bloom a utilizat ceea ce el numește empatie rezonantă și intuiție saturată, citând exact cuvintele sale, pentru a susține și promova carierele unor artiști de muzică rock precum Michael Jackson, Bob Marley, Paul Simon, Billy Idol, Peter Gabriel și încă 100, prea mulți pentru a-i putea menționa. Și asta nu e totul. Priviți cu atenție fotografia recentă a lui Howard Bloom, care e accesibilă public pe internet. Acesta este Howard Bloom la vârsta memorabilă de 70 de ani, recent împliniți. Cum vi se pare acest lucru? Vă las pe dumneavoastră să judecați singuri. De fapt, o să-l vedeți imediat și pe înregistrarea de pe video Skype. Domnia sa locuiește la New York. Acolo era miezul nopții, pe când noi ne pregăteam de interviu, iar aici în România era trecut de ora 6 dimineața. Singura diferență dintre fotografia realizată în timpul zilei, pe care o puteți revedea încă o dată, și filmarea de la miezul nopții, este calitatea tehnică și lumina mai slabă pe care o avea domnul Bloom în încăpere, dar puteți remarca prin comparație că sunt de date recente. Acest lucru nu e întâmplător. Veți afla peste câteva momente faptul că Howard Bloom a fost bolnav în stare gravă și timp de 5 ani în continuu a fost blocat la pat. Nu mi-a oferit prea multe detalii acum, dar mi-a promis că anul viitor vom face un nou interviu, așa că o să-l întreb mai multe. Atunci când cineva se vindecă de o boală foarte gravă, cu cât aceasta a fost mai severă, cu atât mai profundă este schimbarea sa la nivelul biologiei, fiziologiei, personalității și a modului său de gândire. Toate acestea se reflectă pe chipul și în comentariile lui Howard Bloom. Howard Bloom scrie de mai multă vreme o carte care are deja 7200 de capitole. Am ascultat cu atenție și am auzit foarte clar această cifră halucinantă. 7200 nu este numărul de pagini, ci este numărul de capitole cuprinse în cartea sa. Cuprinsul cărții, care este accesibil pe pagina sa de web, are 512 pagini. Vă puteți imagina așa ceva? Aceasta a fost doar o mică parte despre ceea ce face Howard Bloom în timpul său liber la vârsta de 70 de ani. Mai multe veți afla în minutele următoare.
Hi, this is Howard Bloom, and you're watching Science and Knowledge on TVR Cluj.
Hello and welcome to our program Science and Knowledge on TVR Cluj for the first time in Romania.
Well, Christian, it's a pleasure to meet you, and I'm honored to be able to speak to a Romanian audience, thanks to you.
It is a real joy and honor for me to speak with you very important ideas which our public should know about, and all I had discovered about your books and conferences is really fascinating. And I thank you so much for allowing 1 hour from your time for this interview.
Well, thank you. I mean, as I said, it's a privilege because Romania is a very different country than the United States. And if you're a curious person, and science is all about curiosity, then states that are exactly like yours are less interesting than states that are very different.
Let me start first with something I found on your website called superorganism. You are a cell in a social beast. Please make an abstract and tell us about the humanity viewed as a superorganism.
Well, you and I, first of all, let's take a look at what you and I are. We think that we are a singular individual, we have a unique identity, and there's just one of us. But in reality, you and I are 100 trillion cells each. And in theory, each of those cells could carry on a life all of its own. It has its own machinery for producing energy. It has its own way of absorbing food. It has a membrane, which is like a fortress wall that keeps the outside world out and the inside world in. And yet, somehow, these 100 trillion cells that could be individuals aren't. Somehow they collaborate in a way that makes a far, far larger beast. And a beast that has the impression when it decides whether to pick up the socks from the floor or not, or find another pair in the drawer, you think that's only one of you. Well, that's not just 100 trillion cells of you, that's 100 billion cells in your brain, all colluding like a parliament, all debating in your head. So you think there's just one of you. No, there are 100 trillion of you combining to be you. Well, in the same way, what if it turned out that you live in a society of roughly, 18 million, 22 million people, and I live in a nation of roughly 300 million people? Well, what if we're like the cells in our bodies? What if we are part, with all of our individualistic thought processes, what if we are a part of a structure far larger than ourselves that has its own corporate identity, its own collective identity? And is there evidence of that? Well, actually, Christian, there is evidence of that. We are told by the current, remember, science is about proposing ideas and opposing those ideas and testing them until you find out if they fit reality. And there's a current idea in science that we all have a survival instinct and we're all out for individual survival. Well, that would tend to imply that cells are out for their individual survival too. And yet cells are not just out for their individual survival. How can we tell? Because a cell, especially in the brain, you're born with twice as many brain cells as you need. And each brain cell has a default mode. It has a fallback mode. It has a sort of automatic mode. If nothing else happens, this is what will happen. And the default mode is suicide. The default mode is self-destruction. The cell is completely equipped biologically with all the machinery it takes to kill itself. Now, if the cell's only goal is its own survival, why would it have a self-destruct mechanism? Why would it have an internal suicide pill? Because it turns out some cells prove useful. Babies can be born into many different environments. Some babies are born in Romania. Some babies are born in Antarctica or in the Arctic, in an Inuit village, an Eskimo village. Some babies are born in San Francisco or LA, and those environments are very, very different. So having twice as many brain cells as you need turns out to be remarkably useful because you can keep those brain cells that manage to get together in teams that are able to deal with the environment of, let's say, the far north with dog sleds, or of Romania. And your brain can toss out the cells that don't manage to get together in teams that can deal with the Romanian language, that can deal with Romanian culture, that can deal with Romanian technology. So to fashion the brain to fit the environment into which it is born, the brain does a lot of sculpting. And how does it sculpt itself to fit its environment? It gives signals to the cells that aren't necessary to kill themselves off. And conveniently, the cells have internal mechanisms that allow them to kill themselves off. Now, surely that can't apply to human beings. I mean, we all know that human beings are made for self-survival, right? We've all heard the story of walking down the path and running into the saber-toothed tiger. And we've all been told that we have a fight or flight mechanism that's designed for what? For only one thing, for survival. So we either battle the tiger or we run from the tiger as fast as we possibly can. Survival. It's all about survival, right? Well, if it's all about survival, Christian, why, when you were forced to take a tough exam in high school or in the university, why did your brain freeze? You didn't go into fight, and you didn't go into flight. You didn't go into your survival mode. Your survival mode would have brought everything you knew about that subject right to the tip of your brain so that you could survive this exam. But no, instead, your brain did something very self-destructive, very suicidal. It shut itself down and you couldn't remember a thing. Well, that's because we don't just have fight and flight modes. We have fight, flight, and freeze. We also have fight, flight, and kill yourself. And where do we still kill yourself? Not just in that frozen anxiety we go through when we're facing a tough exam. We also see it when we're depressed. You know, one night you go to a party and you have something absolutely fascinating that you want to say. And every time you open your mouth to say something about it, everybody turns their back. And it's very depressing. And when you get home that night, you wonder if you even belong on planet Earth. And you begin to think of, oh my God, if I had a poison, I'd probably take it right now. And when you wake up the next morning, you feel worthless to every single human on the face of the earth, and depression makes it very hard for you to get the motivation to get up and put your clothes on. Well, is that a survival, a set of emotions that is conducive to your survival, that perks you up and gets you ready to plunge into the day? No, it does the opposite. It withdraws you from the day. It makes you feel like not even trying anymore. Those are your self-destruct mechanisms at work. Those are your indications that you are built the way the cell in the brain is built. You are built to perk up and get energetic if you feel you are needed, and to shut yourself down if you feel you are unneeded, and if you feel you are really unneeded, to destroy yourself utterly. There's one other little clue here. If you, on a regular basis, when you attend parties, come with interesting stories and everybody is fascinated, everybody wants to listen to nothing but you, your immune system, the system that fights off illness, the system that fights off flu viruses and that fights off bacteria, your immune system goes into overdrive because you feel you're needed. On the other hand, if every time you go to a party or every time you walk into the office, your boss gives you the feeling that you're a fool, and the people at the party give you the feeling that you're the last person in the world they want to see, guess what happens to your immune system? It goes into underdrive. It goes into self-destruct mode. It opens up the gates to invading viruses. It opens up the gates to invading bacteria. It invites illness. It invites destruction. All of these are signs that you are not built just for the purpose of your own survival. You're built for the survival of a larger being. Why do the cells in the brain kill themselves off? Because they're part of a larger intelligence, and that part of a larger intelligence, your intelligence, is part of a larger identity, a you. And cells operate in the interests not of just themselves, but they operate in the sense of the larger thing, the you.
So just like we are creating the software for our computers, and sometimes they are running badly and disturb our computers, similarly, our mind can create illnesses in the body and develop biological softwares which sometimes are running badly. And if we wish to get healthy, then we need to create software capable to bring us healing.
Well, yes, but we have to recognize a basic fact. We are part of a larger being. We are a part of a society. And the way to heal ourselves is to do things that other people find valuable. If we do things that other people find valuable, and if other people love us and find us absolutely indispensable and are fascinated by us, that will do more than anything else we can possibly do to heal us. That will do more than anything else to shift us from the self-destructive software to the what would you call it? The self-energizing software.
I had passed through a painful experience with migraines, lumbar discopathy, and I arrived in a point where no medical drugs could get me out of the pain. And in the year 2005, the pain became unbearable, and at the end of the year, it became continuously 24 hours a day. And when I solved this situation, I look back to my life and I wrote a book which now is a manual for the students in Houston Victoria University.
Amazing. And what made you better?
Well, 5 main attitudes, biological transformations.
And how did you accomplish that?
5 main attitudes in life. Correct diet, which means balanced raw food. Correct learning, which means reading science books. Correct thinking, which means respect for the personal word and truth. And that means it was observed by means of MRI investigations that when the subject consciously lies or exaggerates the facts, brain activity intensifies.
Right.
While asserting the truth is a simple cognitive process, and lying is a complex process that uses large amounts of energy and cerebral matter by activating many lobes and other areas of the brain. It eventually affects the behavior of the cells. Lying forces the brain to solve its inner conflicts through several chemical reactions. Also, correct breathing and life consciousness are other important attitudes.
Right.
And these 5 attitudes brought me to a point when, in a particular day in 2006, from that day on, I began the recovery, and on the present moment, I had completely healed my lumbar discopathy, my chronic rhinitis, which kept me dependent of a nasal spray for over 4 years continuously.
Amazing.
And I was dependent on that spray. I also solved the migraines and the cholesterol problems.
Amazing. But I went through an illness too. I was in bed from 1988 until 2003, and for 5 years was too weak to speak. And for 5 years was too weak to have another person in the room with me. So I've been through some of these things too. But the bottom line continues to be that if we feel necessary, if we feel people want us, we are a lot healthier than if we feel that nobody wants us at all. In my case, I was saved by the internet. In the United States, we were able to get on the internet in 1984, and since I couldn't have another person in the room with me, that was extremely lonely. And that's an understatement. It creates tortures when you're in isolation like that for a long time. And fortunately, I was able to construct a new identity, to create a new identity online with the internet, and that saved me. And I worked very hard to do things that would be useful to other human beings, and as a consequence, I wrote 3 books while I was too weak to speak.
Well, I'm sure your books are amazing, and I hope one day an editor might translate them in Romanian language in order to understand them completely.
Right, I would enjoy that. Now, one of the things that you're bringing up in your approach is perception. That perception, you can see, okay, in English, we use the example of the glass that's half full, right? A glass that's half full of milk.
Oh,
And
yes.
you can either see the glass as half full or you can see the glass as half empty. And sometimes it's necessary to see the glass as only half full because you need to aspire higher. You need to constantly work toward a goal that's far above where you are right now. And working toward a goal that's far above where you are right now plugs you into a purpose. And when you're plugged into a purpose, it's like being plugged into the needs of other human beings. You are valuable to the superorganism. You are valuable to that larger organism of which you are a part, and that can heal you. But on the other hand, you can have negative perceptions that do nothing but destroy you. You can take a situation that has the possibility of either having joy or grief, and you can always, out of habit, choose the grief. And if you always, out of habit, choose the grief, you live in an internal world of nothing but grief. And if you live in an internal world of nothing but grief, what do your self-destruct mechanisms begin to do? They begin to kill you off. They begin to give you lumbar problems, disc problems, rhinitis.
Yes, it is a very powerful self-destruct.
Yes, because they can produce cancer or they can help produce cancer because, again, your immune system. If your immune system dials down because you have made the mistake of focusing only on negative perceptions, it's your immune system that goes through the body on a constant basis looking for cancerous cells, and it kills those cancerous cells. If your immune system goes into underdrive, then it's going to stop killing the cancerous cells. And in the war between cancer and your immune system, the cancerous cells are going to win.
It is absolutely amazing. You are saying many things which other biologists confirmed, including Bruce Lipton.
Well, you have a problem in Romania right now. And the problem is that you have a very destructive belief system that's running loose through the society. It's happening both in Romania and it's also happening in the former Soviet Union in general. It's happening especially in Russia. There's a paper in Russia, Pravda RU, that promotes it like crazy. You'd think it was the 19th century. Return to orthodoxy is being proposed as not just the solution to everything in life for Russia and for, I imagine, for Romania, but in Russia, in Pravda RU, they are recommending that that orthodoxy lead the world towards salvation. And of course, if it leads the world towards salvation, then it has to do what Islam is trying to do, which is it has to invade North America, it has to invade South America, it has to take over everywhere. Why? Because these poor people are miserable and oppressed because they are kept from the one truth, which is the truth of the Orthodox Church, of course. And these the material that I've been reading is so salvation oriented that it neglects the material world. And apparently from the material you sent me in Romania, there is an obsession with the devil. And there is an obsession with the fact that the devil could be almost anywhere. He could be around the next corner. He could be under the covers of your bed. He could be under the leaf of your salad. And what does that lead to? That leads to an authoritarian mentality. It leads to the mentality of a slave. Why? Because if the devil could be absolutely anywhere, and the way to get rid of the devil is by being good, and the way to be good is to be obedient, and the way to be obedient is to be obedient to an authority, like God or Christ. Where do you get what God or Christ wants? From an authority figure in the church. Where else do you get what God or Christ wants? From the closest ally, of that authority figure in the church, an authoritarian government. So the devil conspires to make you a prisoner and a slave of an authoritarian government. And I don't know if we're allowed to say this on Romanian television, but in Romania and Belarus, some of the the former countries of the Soviet Union, the slide into despotism, the slide into a new kind of authoritarianism has been very disturbing over the course of the last 15 years or so. And in Russia, at least, it looks very much as if Alexander Putin is heavily encouraging the dominance of the Orthodox Church. Why? Because it will make people obedient to him, and it will direct people's ferocity. It will cluster people's ferocity around nationalism and direct it toward outside figures who are, after all, doing the devil's work. And in doing all of that, it gives him faithful, loyal servants, faithful, loyal slaves. Now, because we all live in superorganisms, and society is a superorganism, there is a certain amount of common obedience to certain basic underlying laws we need in order to be a successful superorganism, to keep from being cancers within our society. But life is really all about balance. And it's all about a balance between opposites. And there has to be a balance between individual freedom and authority. If authority goes too far, it can poison the state. If individual freedom goes too far, it can poison the state. The only elixir, the only medicine to keep a state and an individual strong is a solid, yeasty, productive, creative balance between authority and individualism. And some of that is being lost in the former countries and some of the former countries of the former Soviet Union.
All the sociologists and some new thinking biologists like Bruce Lipton are telling us to be more conscious about the superorganism which we are creating now. If we are going to live healthy, we are going to create healthy and powerful superorganisms. But if we are living in illness, then we are creating a weakened superorganism called humanity.
No, I agree with you. If we create the kind of superorganism that, again, goes to a party and has the wrong kind of, it thinks in it something's going to be entertaining that in reality is monstrous, and if people constantly turn their backs, that superorganism is going to get sick because it's going to encounter constant rejection. And we need to live in healthy superorganisms in order to be healthy ourselves. And the superorganism needs us to be healthy. Yeah. In order to be healthy itself, because this is a constantly changing world, Christian. It is very hard to keep up with it. There is a line from Alice in Wonderland, and the Red Queen says it. To stay in place, you have to run hard. To get anywhere, you have to run even harder. So that means you have to have a state that is constantly adaptable, constantly creative, constantly moving forward just to stay in place. And what does a state get its creativity from? Its citizens. And it gets its creativity. A state is sick if it thinks that all of its creativity can come from a handful of people at the top. A handful of people have a limited amount of brain power. A state can be creative and not just keep up, but possibly even get ahead when it has vast numbers of people who are being creative, because they are capable of thinking independently. And to think independently, you need to have a sense of control over your world. And there's a whole biology to the sense of control that we can get into. And if you are being told that the devil has control over your world, and God has control over your world, and you have almost no control over your world, how creative are you going to be in contributing to the health of a state that constantly needs to race in order to stay in place?
Related to this subject, in order to have various topics, which I found something very interesting on the web, and also on some documentary movies, and that is the critical mass theory applied in social behavior. Scientists at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute have found that it takes about 10% of a group of individuals, city, state, region, or the whole world, to show an unshakable faith or a certain behavior, idea, attitude, habit, so that finally that faith, idea, behavior, habit is taken, accepted by the rest of the most individual of that group.
Well, that's an extremely interesting batch of research, and you should send me the URL for it because I haven't seen it. But here's what it fits into. There's something over the course of the last 30 years in microbiology called quorum sensing. If you've got a bunch of bacteria of the kind that create pneumonia, and they're invading your lung, while there are only a small number of them, they'll basically stay quiet and not attack you. But they have a mechanism for determining how many of them there are, and for determining when there's a large enough number of them. And when they determine that there is a large enough number of them to successfully take on your defenses, there have to be many, many, many of them. They have a quorum sensing mechanism, a mechanism for sensing how big the group is and whether it is now strong enough to undertake a whole new phase transition, basically. And all of a sudden, they go from benign riders, passengers in your lung, to invaders. And suddenly they storm the citadel of your defenses, and you're in trouble because they are now trying to give you pneumonia. So, and you don't just see this among bacteria. You see humans. You know the line in the Bible about raising a joyful noise. Raising a joyful noise is seeing whether you can make enough noise to indicate that you're a group big enough to achieve something. You see that when football teams are up against each other and the crowds are roaring in the stands. They're roaring basically to sort of get a measure of who's bigger than who here. So yes, like those invaders in your lung, it takes a certain number of us to get the confidence to feel that we can storm the barriers of society and make a major difference. And that's true whether we're religious groups or whether we're secular groups, whether we're secular and scientific believers or not. And how are secular and scientific believers doing in Romania when it comes to the necessary 10% these days, to quorum sensing?
Yes. Unfortunately, we will never reach this 10% with such a mentality to heal the other 90%. But this behavior had been proved, and I can send you the link. It had been proved that if this minority group has a powerful belief, for example, in case of political elections, and have an idea, then when the critical mass is attained, anything above this 10% will make the others to believe in the new idea, attitude, habits.
Right. Well, you know that I did my field work in a very strange way. My background is in microbiology and theoretical physics. That's what I started in at the age of 10 years old. And then I realized when I was 13 years old that what really interested me was mass human behavior, mass human passions, the sort of and mass human ecstasies, the sort of things that make the forces of history, the sort of things that Adolf Hitler was a brilliant artist at mastering. I mean, he's a man I loathe and despise, but he had an area of talent, and it was rousing the 10% and going beyond that 10%. Yeah. And so when it came time to go to grad school, instead of accepting my 4 grad school fellowships, I took a sideline and I went into something I didn't know anything about, popular culture. And I eventually founded the biggest public relations firm in the music industry.
Very fascinating. Please explain the grand unified theory of everything in a universe, including the human soul, for the non-specialized audience.
Well, okay, first of all, it is huge. I have a table of contents to all the chapters that are in the computer, and the table of contents is 512 pages long as of 3 days ago, 4 days ago. It was 7,200 chapters long the other day. Well, one day, so it's complex. And one day a television producer called and he said, I want to do a television series based on the grand unified theory of everything in the universe, including the human soul. And I said, why? Why would you want to do a television series on something so complex? And he said, because in science we have all kinds of grand unified theories. They're called guts, but they're only about one thing. They're about elementary particles. And your grand unified theory is about everything in the universe, including the human soul. And this happens to be a universe that has human souls in it. So obviously, a theory that only covers elementary particles is covering only the most microscopic part of what this universe is all about and doesn't really qualify as a grand unified theory. Okay, so yes, I've taken on an awful lot more than just elementary particles. And what I'm doing is looking for basic underlying patterns that repeat at level after level after level of complexity. And the most basic of these elementary principles is attraction and repulsion. At the very beginning of the universe, there is an act of infinite repulsion. There's a pinprick, smaller than a pinprick. It's called a singularity. And it explodes. It explodes at a speed that actually goes faster than the speed of light, as impossible as that is supposed to be in our universe. That is repulsion taken to the nth degree. And then what happens? Then all of a sudden, whammo, it is a giant opening sheet of space, time, and speed. That's all that's in front of us if we're watching this universe explode from its very first instant, from the first instant of the Big Bang. But within less than 10 to the minus 30 seconds of a fraction, I mean, an infinitesimal fraction of a second, all of a sudden, like raindrops precipitating from a storm cloud, there comes something amazing from this giant unfurling sheet of space and time moving at incredible speed. I mean, let's stop for a second. Let's stop the expansion of the universe. And you and I are sitting at a coffee table at the beginning of the universe, watching this unfurl. All there's been up until now is space, time, and speed. And Christian, you are the clever one. You are the one with imagination. And I am the crusty old crump. And I'm the conservative. And you say, see that unfurling sheet of space, time, and speed? And yes, of course I've seen it. I've seen it ever since it began at the singularity. And you say, well, I predict that any infinitesimally tiny fraction of a second now, there's going to come precipitating it from it, like raindrops precipitating from a storm cloud, a bunch of things. And I say, Christian, you're crazy. How can things possibly precipitate from nothing but a sheet of time and space moving at incredible speed? Let's be logical here. Let's go according to Aristotle. Add space, time, and speed to space, time, and speed, and what do you get? Nothing but space, time, and speed. Garbage in, garbage out. 1 plus 1 equals 2. You want to add 1 unit of space and time to another unit of space and time? All you're ever going to get is space and time, Christian. It's obvious. And all of a sudden, whomp, whammo, in the tiniest flick of a second, there come things, and there are gazillions of them, and they're quarks. Now, okay, we're often told that this is a random universe. We're often told the story of the 6 monkeys at 6 typewriters, who, if you leave them to type long enough, will eventually, just by accident, just through random chance, will type out the works of Shakespeare. Well, if this were a random universe, and there are a gazillion things, first of all, there shouldn't be any things, because all we had is space and time. How do you get things from space and time? Secondly, okay, this is a random universe. If there are a gazillion things, there should be a gazillion different kinds of things. No, there are only about 16 different kinds of things. What? 16 different kinds of things, and this is supposed to be a random universe? Yeah, they're called quarks. Now, here's where we get to the grand unified theory of everything in the universe, including the human soul and its basic principles, although I've just given you a couple of them quickly. But there is a force that dominates these things. these things have sociality. They have social, when you and I are talking about the fact that if we feel rejected by everybody around us, our immune system shuts down and we become depressed, we're talking about repulsion. And if we're talking about the fact that when everybody greets every story that we have with glee and their eyes light up and all they want to look at is us and all they want to hear is another story, and our immune system goes into overdrive, and all of a sudden we are ebullient and energetic as can possibly be, we feel like masters of the universe, that's attraction. Attraction and repulsion. Where do attraction and repulsion first show up in this universe? Among those quarks. Now, if we were logical, Christian, first of all, the quarks shouldn't exist. Secondly, there should be a gazillion different kinds of them. Third, they should not be social. They should not be capable of communicating with each other. This is the first flick of the universe, for God's sakes. How can we say there's anything social and communicative going on in it? And yet they do communicate, and they communicate with the forces of attraction and repulsion. And two quarks of precisely the same kind perceive each other. Now, that's not the right word. They don't have senses, but in some way they act as if they perceive each other, and if they're of precisely the same kind, they feel a force of repulsion and they skitter away. They escape each other as rapidly as they can. But if two slightly different kinds of quarks perceive each other, instead of feeling the force of repulsion, they feel the force of attraction, and they come together. In fact, they come together in groups of three, and in fact, there are two different kinds of groups of three that they end up making up, and one of those kinds of groups of three produces a neutron, or is a neutron, and one of those those threesomes is a proton. The two most basic elementary particles, along with electrons, those are it. The most basic forms of elementary particles. And it's all because of attraction, repulsion, because the universe isn't really random, and because astonishing things that defy logic occur on a periodic basis in this universe. So it's taking basic principles like those and showing how they recur over and over again, right on up to Hitler, right on up to fears of the devil in Romania, right on up to the way that Alexander Putin uses orthodoxy in order to bring his people together around him so he can be a new czar, because that's all that man really wants to be, is a new czar. Tracking these forces, these elementary patterns on through the cosmos and finding more of them and finding out how they manage to create such astonishing things as you, me, and the video cameras we're using right now, that's what the grand unified theory of everything in the universe, including the human soul, is all about. And that's why the last time we counted it was 7,200 chapters long. And if I counted today, it would probably be many chapters more than that.
Yes, very fascinating. But regarding that, is it possible space might have a geometry?
Well, of course space has a geometry. When Einstein was, Einstein used to walk out of the house in the morning in Princeton.
Yes, but Buckminster Fuller has a theory discovered when space is expanding, the space is expanding within that geometry of a tetrahedron inside the sphere.
Right. Now that's up for grabs. And what do I mean by up for grabs? Over the course of the last 100 years, what really deep minds like Buckminster Fuller and Albert Einstein have known is that they are looking for the underlying geometry of the universe. And Albert Einstein, you know that when he was 10 years old, a medical student who used to come over on Thursday nights to eat with his parents and him gave him Euclid's Elements. And Einstein called it his magic little book. He thought it was the most amazing thing he'd ever seen in his life. And at the age of 10, 11, and 12, he was working out the proofs for Euclid's theorems. In other words, Einstein was a geometry addict. And again, Einstein used to walk out of his house at Princeton and go up the street, and all of a sudden his wife would come running up the street behind him going, "Albert, Albert," and her arms were full. Do you know what her arms were full of? Pants socks, and a shirt and shoes, because Albert Einstein had walked out of the house in his pajamas and his bedroom slippers. He'd forgotten to put on his clothes. And do you know why Einstein forgot to put on his clothes? Because his mind was absorbed in one of the biggest puzzles that a mind can possibly take on. God's own language of the universe, he called it, the underlying geometry of the cosmos, the language in which the force of creation, whatever that is itself, had spoken in producing this cosmos. So Buckminster Fuller came up with one geometric solution. Albert Einstein was coming up with other geometric solutions. One of the most remarkable things is a question, and that is, geometry was born in about 600 BC in Greece with Pythagoras, who borrowed a lot of its elements from a trip he had taken to Egypt. In fact, he'd spent many years in Egypt, half his life in Egypt. And the idea of geometry is 2,600 years old. Now, the question is, do we sense that there is an underlying geometry to the universe because there is an underlying geometry to the universe? Or do we sense that there is an underlying geometry to the universe because for 2,600 years we've been stuck with just this one underlying tool of thought?
Please talk about the essence of your book called Global Brain. Why do we have a global brain?
Well, we've had a global brain since long before there were human beings. Once upon a time, and I'm busy writing this up for another book proposal today, once upon a time there was lots of life in the sea, but there was no life on land, none. And why would life ever bother to go to the land? The sea temperature was friendly. The sea had food. The sea was easy to navigate. The land was above everybody's heads. I mean, it defied gravity, one of nature's most basic laws, to even get there. And secondly, it was all raw, naked, hostile stone being bombarded with even more hostile rays of all kinds, radiation of all kinds. And yet life took to the land. And how did it do it? It did it in massive partnerships. For example, plants took to the land, and plants are engaged in a kind of partnership we call sex. They mix and match their genetic components, and they prefer to do it over distances. They prefer not to do it over short distances. Over long distances is better for them, because in reality, sexuality is about mixing and matching on a large-scale basis, not just a local basis. So, and there were these animals that took to the land called insects. Now, the insects learned to fly, and the plants learned to harness the insects. They learned how to recruit, seduce, and kidnap the insects. To do what? To be their transport mechanisms, to carry their sexual gametes long distances. And how did they do it? They offered a deal to the insects. We will produce pollen and nectar and feed you. And we'll produce these huge disposable billboards advertising what we've got for you. Those are called flower petals. And if you come and pick up the food that we create specially for you and get the pollen on your hairs and carry that pollen over a long distance, you will have done your part of the deal. We will have done our part of the deal. What does this have to do with a global brain? These are two radically different species who have learned radically different ways of coping with the outside world. Plants sit in one place. Bees do the opposite. They fly around. Insects fly around all of the time. But to create a complete system, you needed these two parts of the brain. And basically, the planet has been a planetary brain since the beginning, because different species of bacteria have swapped their information. They've swapped bits of genetic knowledge. They've allowed their genes to drift through the seas and be taken up like manuals, like how-to manuals, by other forms of bacteria. Basically, life has gone from a teaspoonful of life 3.85 billion years ago to roughly 500 trillion tons, and that's a very rough figure, of life today. How has it done it? through a collaborative enterprise in which each species learns its own peculiar lessons, invents its own peculiar techniques, and then somehow shares its techniques with the others. That's a global brain, and we're doing it today when Romania goes off in one direction and Russia goes off in another and China goes off in another, and then Romania and Russia are forced to learn from China because what's happening in China is working and what's happening in Romania is not.
Yes, but if you said so, why can't we have a better cooperation in our society? Or how would you describe this cooperation level within human society today?
Well, every society has cooperation. It has far more cooperation than it realizes. Think of when you walk down a very busy street. There's an amazing kind of combination. Remember, the things operate because of a balance of opposites.
At a certain level, yes. Yes.
But there's an amazing kind of individualism and cooperation operating simultaneously when you walk down the street because you're thinking of what you're going to do for your next TV show. And meanwhile, if you watch what your body is doing, your body is weaving and dancing in between the other human beings. And guess what, Christian? It does such an incredible job of calculating the motion of your fellow humans and its own motion that it manages to come within that far or that close to another human and never clip him. And it does this with hundreds of humans as you walk down the street, carrying out this amazing, collaborative, intertwining dance that allows you all your individual freedom. It's an astonishing dance of opposites. So we're collaborating with each other. Look, every time you eat a meal, it's a meal that comes from the actions of other human beings. You didn't raise that food. In many cases, you didn't even cook that food. When you drink a sip of water, you didn't build the plumbing system that brought that water to you, nor did you invent the plumbing system that brought that water to you. Almost every act you take is an act of massive collaboration in disguise.
Yes, I agree with you, but what about our egos and mentalities? What should we do about? How can we make it better to improve ourselves?
Okay, there's a Bloomism, and it is that any good thing in excess is a poison. Too much of any good thing can kill you. And ego is a good thing. Why is ego a good thing? Because, Christian, when you were 18 years old and aspired to have a television show, you really dreamed of having a television show, look, you were just a student. You know, there were all kinds of reasons why you could never possibly have a television show in your life. And what kept you going? Your ego. It was a flotation cushion. It was a device that allowed you to bob above despair over and over again, not just day after day after day, but year after year after year, until you finally got what you wanted. And even today, you haven't gotten what you wanted. And even today, to the extent that you're capable of still aspiring to far greater things, it's your ego that's keeping you alive in that process, that's allowing you to endure. But too much ego, and ego allows you to do your part in exploring new landscapes on behalf of your fellow human beings, which is extremely important. But when your ego takes over, but your ego in overdose can poison you. So the trick is to keep ego in balance. And if you make the mistake, and many of my friends have made this mistake thanks to Buddhism. Buddhism has convinced them that ego is all bad and that they have to destroy their ego. Well, guess what? Destroy your ego and you've destroyed your value to your fellow human beings. All you're capable of being is a servant. And people, in order to survive, need more than just servants. They need collaborators. They need collaborators on the level of the people who invented the piping that brought you the water that you sipped in between 2 bites of your meal.
Yes, but we should not need wars and crimes in our society. But still we have them.
We absolutely should not need wars and crime. But guess what? In the same way that you aspired once upon a time to be a TV producer, and it seemed absolutely impossible, getting rid of war and crime are things we need to aspire to and stick with persistently. We need to stick with those aspirations persistently. And if we do, we will diminish them. And guess what? We already have. We already have, and we don't know it. The amount of violence in the Western world, at least, has gone down since 1650. It's gone down dramatically. It's gone down to the point where if you and I had grown up in an indigenous society, in a hunter-gatherer society, the kinds of societies that some people worship for being at one with nature, at harmony with the world, and in peace, our odds of dying a violent death would have been approximately 15 times what the odds of dying a violent death are today. We have multiplied the level of peace dramatically. And yet, because we are such stupid son of a bitches, we don't see it. We don't notice it. It's right under our nose. Now, obviously, that means that in the same way you walk down the street without colliding with anybody and some calculating machinery within you that isn't conscious managed that for you, we've managed to create peace in spite of ourselves, in spite of our conscious selves. Well, our job is to learn from our non-conscious selves their most brilliant parts and build on them. That's one of the jobs of consciousness. And to do it, we have to see what's right under our nose, which means following the first two rules of science, one of which you alluded to at the very beginning of this program. It's one of the ways that you got better. The first rule of science is the truth at any price, including the price of your life. And that lesson helped make you whole when you were suffering from migraines every day of the week. And the second rule of science is look at things right under your nose as if you have never seen them before, and then proceed from there. Look at things that you and everybody around you take for granted, like that astonishing dance you do when walking down a crowded sidewalk, as if you have never seen them before, and then proceed from there and look for the things that you and everyone around you take for granted. Then see them with wonder, because even finding them, even seeing them, is one of the most difficult tasks in the world, and those are the obligations of science.
Aceasta a fost prima parte a interviului cu Howard Bloom și am spus prima parte deoarece, deși noi ne-am pregătit pentru o discuție de o oră, la un moment dat l-am anunțat că trebuie să schimb caseta. Am ezitat puțin, neștiind dacă va mai avea timp pentru mine. Probabil că ar fi urmat să avem o încheiere și să ne luăm rămas bun, dar surpriza a fost că am mai discutat încă 38 de minute. Aceste 38 de minute le-am pregătit spre difuzare data viitoare, având și un comentariu special de 12-15 minute realizat de profesorul Adrian Pătruț. Vom vorbi despre darwinism, evoluționism, despre legea atracției și respingerii, vom avea o discuție fabuloasă despre reinventarea capitalismului și multe altele. Howard Bloom avea o idee foarte importantă, citez: priviți cu atenție asupra tuturor lucrurilor pe care dumneavoastră și ceilalți le luați drept bune și adevărate și începeți să le studiați ca și când nu le-ați mai întâlnit niciodată. Am încheiat citatul. Știința este o cunoaștere aranjată și clasificată în conformitate cu adevărul, faptele și legile generale ale naturii. Știința, de fapt, este cel mai bine definită ca o căutare atentă, disciplinată, logică, de cunoștințe despre toate aspectele vieții și a Universului, obținute prin examinarea celor mai bune dovezi disponibile și este întotdeauna supusă unor operațiuni de corecție și îmbunătățire pe baza descoperirii unor dovezi mai bune. Emisiunea se reia în fiecare luni dimineața la ora 11. Avem transmisie simultană și pe internet. În plus, puteți beneficia de revizionarea întregului serial Știință și Cunoaștere în fiecare zi de marți până vineri la ora 15 pe TVR Cluj. Fiți alături de noi data viitoare la o nouă întâlnire cu Știință și Cunoaștere.